There's a moment, and if you've spent any real time near humans, you know it, where everything goes quiet. Not the quiet of empty space. Not the comfortable silence between allies. The other kind. The kind where a room full of beings who have survived wars, plagues, and the collapse of 3 separate interstellar governments all stop what they're doing and look at one small, soft, embarrassingly fragile creature, and nobody laughs anymore. I was there the day the galaxy stopped laughing at Terrans. I wasn't supposed to be. I was a logistics officer on a border station that hadn't seen real conflict in 40 years. I filed manifest reports. I approved fuel allocations. I drank a beverage I had been assured was close enough to coffee every morning and hated it every morning and kept drinking it anyway because the ritual mattered more than the taste, which, in retrospect, was the first sign that humans were already changing how I thought. His name was Reeves. He was 26 years old by Terran reckoning. He had a scar through his left eyebrow that he'd gotten, he told me once, not in combat but tripping over a cargo crate at age 14. He carried a battered field kit that smelled like machine oil and something biological I never identified. He laughed at things that weren't funny. He stayed calm during things that were terrifying. And, the day the Vethkai fleet dropped out of transit 200 kilometers off our station's bow with 17 warships and a formal demand for unconditional surrender, he made a cup of that terrible coffee, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Huh. Okay. So here's what we're gonna do." He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself. That should have been the first warning. This is what I recorded. This is what I remember. And this is the part that still keeps me awake, even now, not the battle, not the losses, not the things I saw that I don't have words for. It's the fact that he never once thought he was doing anything remarkable. That's the part that gets you. That's always the part that gets you. The first thing you need to understand about Reeves is that he arrived on Waystation Orbit 7 under what my supervisor, Senior Coordinator Dathiel, described in official paperwork as temporary reassignment pending review. What this meant in practice was that someone somewhere in the Terran liaison chain had done something that made someone else uncomfortable, and, rather than deal with it directly, a concept humans understand instinctively and, the rest of us find baffling, they had shipped the problem to the furthest, quietest, least consequential posting available. That was us. I am Savith. Logistics and Manifest Officer, 3rd Tier, Orbit 7 Station. I have held this posting for 11 years. I have approved fuel allocations for 11 years. I have filed incident reports, nearly always minor, occasionally embarrassing, never dangerous, for 11 years. I have drunk the coffee substitute every morning because the actual Terran blend coffee costs 4 times as much to import and my budget had not been updated since the partition. The coffee substitute tastes like something dissolved a mineral in lukewarm regret. I drink it anyway. When Reeves stepped off the transit shuttle, he was carrying 2 bags. One was a standard-issue Terran field pack, worn to a kind of soft gray at the seams that suggested it had been repaired several times by someone who was good at it but didn't care how it looked. The other was a small personal case with a dent in the side, and, on the dent pressed therein what I later learned was called a sticker, a decorative adhesive with no structural purpose, was an image of a small yellow creature with enormous eyes and an expression of apparent alarm. He saw me looking at it. "Pikachu," he said, as if that explained anything. "I am Savith. I will process your arrival documentation." "Great." He set the bags down and looked around the arrival bay. It was, objectively, not impressive. 15 years of budget reviews had left the bay's bioluminescent panels dim on 2 walls, and the 3rd wall had a long maintenance seal across it from an incident involving a cargo lifter and a structural support beam that I had filed 17 reports about and which had not been repaired. Nice place. It is functional. Sure. He picked his bags up. Where do I sleep? That was the entirety of his arrival. No questions about his duties. No questions about the station's current operational status. No apparent interest in why he had been reassigned, what had precipitated it, or what was expected of him going forward. He just wanted to know where to sleep. I showed him to his quarters. They were standard issue, small, efficient, equipped with the necessities and nothing else. He dropped his bags, looked at the narrow bunk for approximately 2 seconds, and then sat down on it with a kind of economical finality, like a being that has slept in worse places and knows the number exactly. Shift starts at 6th hour, I told him. You'll be assisting with cargo manifests for the transit dock. Senior Coordinator Dathiel will brief you on what kind of traffic does this station see? I paused. Primarily commercial. Some diplomatic. The occasional hegemony patrol. We are a minor way station on the Orvith corridor. Traffic is, but the corridor goes where? Something in the way he asked it made me stop. It wasn't idle conversation. He was looking at the wall that faced, if you knew the station's orientation, the outer rim side of the corridor. There was nothing on the wall. It was just a wall. The Orvith corridor connects the inner systems to the border territories, I said. Approximately 40 light cycles of transit lanes. The border territories have been contested historically, but there have been no significant incursions in 40 years. Yeah. He lay back on the bunk. I read the briefing. Then, why did you ask? He closed his eyes. Because there's a difference between what's in a briefing and what's actually true. I did not have a response to that. I left him to rest. I went back to my office. I filed his arrival documentation. I noted, under preliminary assessment, that the Terran liaison transfer was functional and appeared to have a basic grasp of station geography. I drank the coffee substitute and hated it. I did not think about the wall he had been looking at. The second thing you need to understand is that Dathiel hated him on sight. This was not unusual. Dathiel hated most new arrivals on sight. It was something of a specialty of his, a finely cultivated default suspicion that he wore like a second uniform. He was a Vorith, 7 feet of layered plate biology, for arms, a face that had evolved over millions of years specifically to communicate displeasure, and a bureaucratic precision that I had, over 11 years, come to genuinely admire even when it was directed at me. He called Reeves into the main operations bay on the second morning and stood over him. The Vorith do this to establish hierarchy, it is very automatic, they don't always notice they're doing it, and said, you will observe and assist only. You will not interface with station systems without authorization. You will not communicate with docking vessels without my explicit approval. You will file all observations through the standard format. Is this understood? Reeves looked up at him. He was sitting, which made the height differential roughly double what it would have been standing. He didn't stand. Sure, he said. What's the authorization process for system interface? Dathiel blinked. 3 of his 4 eyes, in sequence, a Vorith expression of mild surprise that they also perform when recalibrating. You fill out a Form 7 Delta and submit it to me for review. How long does review take? Standard review is 3 working shifts. And emergency authorization? There is a Form 9 Epsilon for emergency, great. Reeves nodded and turned back to the manifest he'd been reading. I'll get those filed. Dathiel stood over him for another several seconds. The filing had not been a question. He hadn't argued, hadn't pushed back, hadn't asked why the process was so slow or complained about bureaucratic inefficiency the way the last 3 Terran transfers had. He had just noted the system and moved on. Dathiel did not trust this. He told me so, afterward, in the corridor outside operations. He's too quiet, he said. His upper plates were doing the thing they do when he's working something out, a kind of slow compression, like a fist closing without urgency. The Terran transfers are never this quiet. He seems to be adapting to the station's procedures. He's measuring something. Dathiel's eyes did the sequence again. I don't know what yet. I thought about the wall. The way Reeves had looked at it. I'll observe, I said. I filed a note in my private log, not an official report, just the small personal record I keep because 11 years of logistics has taught me that the unimportant details are always the ones that matter, that the Terran transfer was asking procedural questions that had no immediate practical application for a cargo manifest officer, and that I did not know why, and that I found this faintly concerning in a way I could not yet quantify. Then, I went back to the coffee substitute and hated it, and the morning passed without incident, and I forgot about it. Reeves filed the Form 7 Delta and the Form 9 Epsilon on the same day he arrived. Both were technically correct. Both cited legitimate operational justifications. The 7 Delta referenced cargo verification efficiency, the 9 Epsilon referenced potential transit anomaly response. Neither was false. Both were, in retrospect, exactly the kind of paperwork that gets approved because it sounds reasonable and nobody reads it closely enough to ask follow-up questions. Dathiel approved them. He told me later he had read them 3 times and found nothing wrong, which was the reason he approved them and also the reason he was angry about having approved them. On the 4th day, Reeves was quiet in the way that, I have since learned, humans are quiet when they are thinking very hard and don't want anyone to notice. He sat at his secondary console in the manifest bay, processed cargo arrivals with perfect efficiency and zero commentary, and spent every available moment between arrivals studying the station's transit traffic logs. Not the current logs. The historical ones. 40 years of transit data. I know this because I checked his access history. Not for any official reason, I am a logistics officer, transit data access is not my jurisdiction, but because Dathiel's comment about measuring had stayed with me, and I am, at my core, a person who needs to understand what category a thing belongs to before I can stop thinking about it. On the 5th day, I asked him about it. You've been reviewing the historical transit logs, I said. It was the end of second shift. The manifest bay was empty except for us. The dim bioluminescent panels cast the kind of light that makes everything look like it's slightly underwater. The complete archive. 40 years. He was eating something from a small container. It smelled like something had been cured in a way that most preservation methods would not approve of, and then, combined with something that Vorith cuisine categorized as a warning chemical. He ate it with complete contentment. Yeah, he said. May I ask why? He looked at me for a moment. He had a particular way of assessing, when he did it, not the obvious tactical scan that military types often do, not the social calculation that diplomats do. More like he was just deciding whether a thing was worth saying out loud. The Vethkai have been running 3 ship patrol patterns through the outer edge of this corridor for the last 8 months, he said. That's not in any current alert. But, if you look at the historical data, the last time they ran that specific patrol density in this corridor was 6 weeks before the Orvith skirmish. 42 years ago. The bioluminescent panels hummed. That's a significant pattern extrapolation, I said carefully, from limited data. It's also what's in the logs. He ate another piece of whatever the preserved thing was. I'm probably wrong. I'm a cargo manifest officer. He said it completely without irony. I went back to my office. I pulled up the historical transit logs myself, the real ones, not the summary reports that go into our operational briefings, and I spent 4 hours reading 40 years of patrol density data for the Orvith corridor's outer edge, and the reason I spent 4 hours doing this when it had nothing to do with my job and everything to do with a feeling I did not want to name was that Reeves had said he was probably wrong in a tone that meant he was not wrong, and I knew it, and I did not know how I knew it. I filed nothing. There was nothing official to file. A Terran cargo officer had looked at some logs and noticed a pattern that our analytical systems had not flagged, and this was either coincidence or something else, and I did not have a category for the something else, so I put it aside. I drank the coffee substitute. It tasted, that night, like the mineral in regret but colder. On the 9th day, the Vethkai fleet arrived. 17 warships. I know the number precisely because I counted them on the sensor display myself, twice, because the number didn't make sense and I thought I had made an error. The Vethkai had not crossed the Orvith corridor boundary in 40 years. They had not, in 40 years, mobilized a fleet of this scale for anything shorter than a full system annexation. 17 warships for a waystation with 43 personnel, a cargo dock, and 2 functioning defensive turrets, one of which was awaiting a replacement part one had ordered 11 months ago and, not yet received, was not a patrol response. It was not a border enforcement action. It was a statement. The statement arrived in the form of a formal transmission on the standard diplomatic channel, delivered in hegemony standard with the particular cadence that indicates something was written by committee and approved by someone who had never had a conversation with the people they were addressing. It informed us that Waystation Orvith 7 was located within a contested zone of strategic significance. It informed us that the Vethkai sovereignty was asserting jurisdictional priority over said zone. It informed us that all station personnel had 6 standard hours to comply with evacuation protocols, after which the station would be considered a valid military target. It was very politely worded. The Vethkai are always very polite when they are about to do something terrible. It is a cultural feature. Dathiel was on the operations floor when the transmission came through. I watched all 4 of his arms go rigid simultaneously, a full Vorith threat response, involuntary, the kind of thing that happens when something has bypassed the rational mind entirely and gone straight to the old deep wiring. The younger staff were frozen. The 2 Meneth on the night logistics shift had already begun the low-pitched resonance their species produces under extreme stress, a sound that felt like a sustained pressure just below hearing. I was standing at my station, looking at the sensor display, counting the ships a third time. Reeves was still at his console. He had not stopped what he was doing. He was looking at the transmission text on his secondary screen with the same expression he'd had while reading the historical transit logs, focused, quiet, a slight compression around the eyes that I had come to understand was what his face did when he was processing something. His right hand was resting on the console surface and his index finger was tapping, very lightly, a rhythm I didn't recognize. Dathiel turned to him. Terran. Yeah. Did you know about this? It was not quite a question. Dathiel's voice had gone to a register I had only heard twice in 11 years, both times in situations that were subsequently classified as significant incidents. Reeves looked up from the transmission text. I thought it was possible. You thought? Dathiel stopped. All 4 arms. The plates were doing something I'd never seen them do, a kind of cascading, like a slow wave across his back and shoulders. You filed a Form 9 Epsilon. For potential transit anomaly response. Yeah. That form grants you emergency system access authorization. Yes, it does. Reeves's finger had stopped tapping. He was looking at Dathiel with something that I can only describe as patience, the very specific kind of patience that is not waiting for the other person to finish talking but, rather waiting for them to arrive at the same place they're already standing. I'd like to start using it now, if that's okay. The operations floor was very quiet. The Menetha's resonance had dropped to something subsonic. Through the main viewport, the stars were the same as they always were. The Orvith corridor doesn't look like much from a waystation, just a stretch of dark with the distant smear of the inner system cluster on one side and the hard black of the border territories on the other, but I found myself looking at them differently. What, Dathiel said, do you intend to do? We've got 6 hours. Reeves stood up. He was, as always, not particularly impressive to look at. Average height by Terran standards. The scar through his eyebrow. The worn field pack, which was sitting under his console and which he hadn't touched since day 1, but which I now noticed he had set at an angle that was not quite random, slightly outward, accessible from his current position by a single motion. I'd like to use them. To do what? He picked up his cold container of the preserved and warning chemical food, finished it, and dropped it in the recycler with the ease of someone completing a perfectly ordinary task in the middle of something that was very much not ordinary. Negotiate, he said. Dathiel's plates cascaded again. The Vethkai do not negotiate under flag of force. They have 17 warships, I know. And we have 2 turrets, one of which is non-functional, I know that too. And 43 personnel and a cargo dock and no defensive capability that would survive the first engagement, yes. Reeves was looking at the sensor display now, the one showing the 17 ships in their holding pattern. But they don't know what we know. And they don't know what we don't know. And there's a specific difference between those 2 things that I think we can use. The operations floor. The Meneth, subsonic. Dathiel standing with all 4 arms rigid and his plates doing the wave. And, me, at my station, watching the Terran look at 17 warships with that quiet expression, not afraid, not performing calm, just genuinely engaged with the problem the way you'd be engaged with a difficult manifest that needed a solution. And, the thing I noted in my private log later, the detail I couldn't put in an official report, the thing that sat in the back of my processing from that moment forward, was this: he had known for 5 days. He had known, or suspected, or calculated with enough certainty to prepare, for 5 days, and, in those 5 days he had filed 2 forms and, done his assigned work and, eaten the preserved food and, not said anything, not to me, not to Dathiel, not in any form I could find except to pull 40 years of transit logs and, ask me, once, a question that I had thought was idle conversation. And, he still looked like someone who was working a logistics problem. I left my station. I crossed the floor to where he was standing. I stopped beside him, looking at the sensor display. "What do you need?" I asked. He glanced at me. The slight compression around the eyes again. "The station's communication architecture," he said. "Full access. And, whatever you know about Vethkai Fleet Command protocols. I'm a logistics officer." "I know." A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the understated version of one, the kind that means something happened inside that didn't quite make it to the surface. "But, you've been here 11 years and, you read everything. I've seen how fast you pull reference data. You know this corridor better than anyone on this station." He had been watching me too. I had not noticed. That bothered me, in a way I filed under a category I labeled temporarily and, have not relabeled since. "Dathiel," I said, without turning around, "I'm going to assist the Terran liaison with communications architecture access." Formally logged. There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause where you can hear a senior officer deciding whether the situation has outgrown the chain of command. "Logged," Dathiel said. His voice was back to its normal register. "Controlled. Official." And, underneath the official, something I had also only heard twice before, the Vorath equivalent of not knowing what to do and, trusting, against every instinct, that someone else might. 6 hours, Reeves said, and sat back down. His fingers started tapping again. I pulled a chair up beside him, opened the communications architecture on my screen, and started pulling everything I knew about Vethkai Fleet Command protocols, which was, because I had been here 11 years and, I read everything, considerably more than a logistics officer should have known. The sensor display showed 17 ships, still holding, patient in the way that things are patient when they already know they've won. I did not drink the coffee substitute again until everything was over. When I finally did, on the morning of the 11th day, I noticed for the first time that it tasted different than I'd thought. Not good. Not close to good. But, not just the mineral and, the regret. Something else. Something I didn't have a word for. Complicated and, faintly warm and, not at all what I'd expected it to be. I sat with that for a while. The Vethkai did not respond to our first hail. This was expected. Dathiel had explained it to me once, years ago, during one of the rare quiet shifts where he talked about things that were not operational. The Vethkai considered an immediate response to a hail a form of social surrender. You answered too fast, you implied you'd been waiting, and waiting implied need. Their diplomatic correspondence always arrived in increments deliberately timed to signal that the sender had other things to do and was making time, graciously, for you. The longer they made you wait before the first response, the more powerful they considered the statement. We had 6 hours. They took 40 minutes to answer the first hail. Reeves had spent those 40 minutes with the communications architecture spread across 2 screens and my notes on Vethkai Fleet Protocol loaded on a third, not reading it in the way you read documentation but absorbing it in the way I'd seen him absorb the transit logs, not looking for specific facts but constructing a map of how the thing worked, what its logic was, where its assumptions lived. He also made coffee. Actual coffee, from what I eventually identified as a compressed supply packet in the battered field kit he'd pulled out from under his console. The smell of it filled the manifest bay almost immediately, something dense and dark and aggressively present, the kind of smell that had a texture to it, that arrived in a room before you'd decided to notice it. The 2 men on the floor both oriented toward it involuntarily, their sensory clusters opening toward the source with the particular automated quality of a reflex that hadn't been consulted. Reeves poured one cup. He didn't offer any. He just held it in his left hand while his right hand worked the screen, and he drank it in intervals that had nothing to do with pauses in his work. He'd take a sip mid-sentence of a protocol document, mid-calculation, mid-stare at a ship formation on the sensor display, and every time he did, something in his posture changed by a fraction, the way a machine recalibrates when you give it the input it was designed for. I noted this in my private log, *the Terran feeds himself during active threat analysis. Not as a comfort behavior. As a maintenance behavior. The distinction matters, and I cannot explain why it matters yet. The transmission came in at the 40-minute mark, and it was from someone calling themselves Fleet Voice Savathoran, which was a Vethkai designation that placed them at approximately the third tier of Fleet Command, not the Fleet Commander, but close enough to indicate that the Fleet Commander had considered this opening exchange worth delegating rather than handling personally. A calculated slight. You send someone senior enough that we can't complain they disrespected us, but junior enough that we know we're not the main event. Fleet Voice Savathoran had a face built for disinterest. The Vethkai are broadly bilateral in structure but denser in the upper torso, with a face that has evolved multiple simultaneous expression layers. What I understood from Dathiel's historical briefings was that their primary face communicates what they want you to think they feel, while a set of secondary musculature beneath the cheekbones communicates what they're actually calculating. Experienced Vethkai diplomats can run both layers independently. Savathoran was running what I classified as board authority on the primary and something more attentive on the secondary. Waystation Orvith 7, Savathoran said, in hegemony standard with the Vethkai formal syntax that makes every sentence sound like the conclusion of a longer argument you weren't invited to witness, the sovereignty acknowledges your request for communication. You have until 4th hour to confirm evacuation compliance. Reeves leaned forward and opened the transmission channel. Fleet Voice, he said, in the same hegemony standard but without the formal syntax, plain, professional, the register you used to discuss a logistics problem. Thanks for the response. I want to talk about the transit lane. A pause. On Savathoran's face, the secondary musculature shifted. This station will be designated an active zone of engagement following non-compliance with evacuation orders. Communication outside of evacuation confirmation is. The Orvith corridor handles approximately 600 commercial transit registrations per standard cycle, Reeves said. You have 17 warships positioned across the primary lane entry. If this position is maintained through the engagement window, you're looking at a minimum 40-cycle disruption of commercial traffic, which means the inner system markets don't get their scheduled RIM commodity shipments, which means, he glanced at the screen, not performing the look, genuinely checking a number, roughly 12,000 secondary contract violations across the hegemony commercial network, all of which cite force majeure due to military action in a designated commercial corridor. Savathoran's primary face had not changed. The secondary had. The sovereignty is not. I know you're not concerned about hegemony commercial law, Reeves said. He took a sip of coffee. On a transmission channel. To a Vethkai fleet officer. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be concerned about the 3 Vethkai commercial houses that hold primary contracts on approximately 40% of that transit volume, because they're going to be the ones petitioning the Sovereignty Council about asset loss, and I think you probably know which council members those houses have relationships with. The operations floor was silent. Dathiel had appeared at the back of the manifest bay at some point in the last few minutes. I had not noticed him arrive. He was standing with all 4 arms at a position I had never seen, not rigid, not the threat response, but a very particular stillness, like a Vorith who has decided to stop doing anything at all until they know more. The pause from Savathoran was longer this time. 17 seconds. I counted. This station, Savathoran said, has a Terran liaison officer speaking on behalf of a commercial transit matter. I'm the senior available officer for diplomatic communication, Reeves said. He wasn't lying. He had filed a Form 9 Epsilon granting him emergency system access. Dathiel had approved it. There was no technical inaccuracy in the statement. And I'm raising a transit matter, not a military one. I'm trying to help us both avoid a problem. You are attempting to leverage commercial interests against a military operation. I'm trying to figure out if we have a problem that needs a fleet, Reeves said, or a problem that needs a conversation. Because those are different problems and they have different solutions, and I'd rather know which one we're dealing with before the 4-hour window closes. Another pause. Shorter this time. Specify your proposal, Savathorin said. Reeves looked at the screen. His finger was not tapping. His coffee hand had gone still. He was, for a moment, the most motionless I had ever seen him, and it was not the stillness of someone who didn't know what to say next. It was the stillness of someone who had already said it, and was now waiting for the room to catch up. What I want, he said, is to know what you actually need. Not what the operational order says. What the underlying problem is. Because I've looked at 40 years of this corridor's history, and the last time your fleet ran this patrol density here was 6 weeks before the Orvith skirmish, and the Orvith skirmish started because both sides had a resource access problem that nobody talked about until it was too late and people died over it. I would like to not do that again. If you'll tell me what the actual problem is. Savathorin's face. The secondary musculature, which I had been watching carefully, did something I had not seen it do before. A kind of settling. Not relaxation. Not warmth. The specific adjustment of a being who has encountered something they had not prepared for and is now running a rapid recalculation. This communication, Savathorin said slowly, is not standard. No, Reeves agreed. It's not. The channel held open for 11 seconds without either party speaking. I was aware, in those 11 seconds, of the station's hum, the specific frequency of the ventilation system cycling, the faint vibration from the dock where a cargo hauler was still berthed and was presumably very confused about what was happening, and of the coffee smell, still present, still aggressive, still completely indifferent to the situation around it. Transit access, Savathorin said finally, is not the concern. I didn't think it was. The concern is the hegemony survey markers placed in the outer corridor without sovereignty notification. 14 markers. Placed 4 months ago. Inside what the sovereignty considers provisional territorial waters. And there it was. I pulled the survey records while Savathorin was still finishing the sentence. 14 markers, placed by a hegemony geological survey team, standard resource identification protocol, inner corridor expansion project logged in the hegemony system and, technically, required to be cross-filed with all entities holding territorial claims in the survey area, which would have included the Vethkai sovereignty, except that the administrative unit responsible for the cross-filing had been in a budget review for 3 months and the filings were backlogged. The filings had not been made. 14 survey markers had been placed in contested space and nobody had told the Vethkai because the paperwork was delayed. 17 warships. 43 personnel. A 6-hour ultimatum. Over a filing backlog. I was aware of a feeling that I could only describe as a Vorith plate cascade by analogy, except that I don't have plates. It was more of an interior version, a wave moving through the cognitive processing centers where certainty lives, dislodging things that had seemed fixed. The markers, Reeves said, weren't a territorial claim. They were placed without notification. The absence of notification is a bureaucratic failure by the survey administration. He said it flat. No diplomatic cushioning. No careful phrasing. Just the descriptor, accurate and plain. That's not an excuse. It's what happened, and it shouldn't have, and I think if you check the hegemony cross-filing queue you'll find the notifications are in there. They're just weeks late, which I know doesn't fix the problem but it does tell you something about intent. A pause. It tells me, Savathorin said, that the hegemony's administrative competence is poor. Reeves again. No argument. Yeah. I know. Believe me. He took a sip of coffee with the precise weight of someone who has personally suffered the administrative competence in question. But poor administration and hostile territorial action are different categories of problem, and responding to the first one with 17 warships tends to turn it into the second one whether you want it to or not. 14 seconds. What, said Savathorin, are you proposing? Reeves set down the coffee. He turned to me, not to the screen, to me, physically, which meant he was asking a logistics officer for something in front of a Vethkai fleet officer, which was either confidence or calculation or both, and which I later decided was both. The cross-filing notifications, I said, because I had already been building the document. I can transmit them directly to the fleet command channel within the hour. Complete and formally logged. Along with a request for temporary survey suspension pending sovereignty review of the marker placements, which the survey team has the authority to grant and which I'm formally requesting right now on the station's behalf. Reeves looked at the screen. Survey suspension pending your review of the markers. All 14. Official cross-filing transmitted to your command channel within the hour. Is that a basis for conversation? The secondary musculature on Sabathoran's face was doing something I had never seen Vethkai secondary musculature do. I did not have a classification for it. I logged it as unresolved and moved on. This will require confirmation from the Sovereignty Council, Sabathoran said. Not agreement. Not rejection. The careful phrasing of someone who needs to make a call to a superior and wants to do it without losing face in front of the person who just forced them to. Of course, Reeves said. Take the time you need. The channel closed. The operations floor. The hum. The Meneth had stopped the subsonic resonance at some point. I wasn't sure when. Dathiel was still standing at the back of the bay. One of his secondary arms had moved, just the one, a small reflexive gesture, the Vorith equivalent of exhaling, and then gone still again. Reeves picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Savath, he said, without looking up from the screen where he was now drafting the cross-filing notifications with the same focused efficiency he brought to cargo manifests. How long does it actually take you to pull cross-filing documentation from the survey archives? 30 minutes. 40 if the index is fragmented. Good. He typed something. I told them an hour. So we have 20 minutes to make sure what we send them is clean. I sat down at my console. I opened the survey archives. The notifications were in the queue, exactly as he'd said, weeks late, perfectly intact, sitting in the backlog with 1,100 other cross-filings that the administrative unit had not gotten to because of the budget review. I started pulling them. Behind me, I heard Dathiel walk across the floor toward his station. His footsteps had a particular weight to them, the weight of someone who has been standing in a fighting posture for a long time and is now standing differently, not relaxed, but redistributed. He didn't say anything. He sat down. He opened his own screen. After a moment, I'll verify the formal request documentation. Thank you, Reeves said. A pause. The specific quality of a pause where something is being decided. The Form 9 Epsilon, Dathiel said. You filed it before you had any confirmed intelligence. You filed it on a pattern analysis from 40-year-old logs. Yes. And, if the pattern had been coincidental? If there had been no fleet? Reeves finished his cold coffee. He set the cup down on the corner of the console, not the recycler, just the corner, because he was still typing, and I noticed it had a ring mark on the bottom from previous cups, a dark circle worn into the surface over time, the kind of mark that accumulates not from carelessness but from habit. Then, I'd have filed the forms for nothing, he said, and the worst-case scenario was Dathiel being annoyed at me for wasting administrative time. He was already annoyed at you, I said. Yeah. The corner of his mouth moved. I know. Dathiel, behind us, said nothing. The verification document opened on his screen with a sound like a dry formal agreement. I filed the cross-filing notifications at the 53-minute mark. Clean. Complete. Formally logged. The Vethkai fleet held position for another 2 hours and 17 minutes. I know the duration precisely because I watched the sensor display for the entirety of it, and, at the 1 hour 40 mark I became aware that I had not blinked in some time and that the station's hum had separated itself in my awareness into component frequencies, the ventilation cycle, the dock vibration from the cargo hauler, the specific resonance of the 2 defensive turrets in standby mode, including the one that was awaiting the replacement part. Then, the fleet began withdrawing. Not all at once. 3 ships first, repositioning to the outer corridor boundary. Then, 6 more, pulling back to a pattern that wasn't a holding posture but wasn't a retreat either, something in between, the fleet equivalent of an entity that has decided it doesn't need to make a point right now and would like to leave without it looking like they changed their minds. Savathoran sent a final transmission that arrived in text only, no visual, *, the sovereignty acknowledges receipt of documentation. Survey marker review will proceed through standard protocol. Further communication should be directed to the sovereignty diplomatic channel, * Reeves read it. He typed the acknowledgement, formal, correct, the exact language required by Interstellar Diplomatic Response Protocol, which he apparently knew, which I filed under the growing category of things he apparently knew that he had not mentioned. He sent it. Then, he leaned back in his chair, and, for the first time since the fleet had appeared on the sensor display, I saw his posture change in a way that was not task-related. Acetylene. The particular physical grammar of a being that has been holding something very carefully for a long time and has just set it down. He didn't say anything for a while. The sensor display showed the fleet completing its withdrawal. The stars through the manifest bay's small viewport were the same as they always were. Reeves, I said. Yeah. You were not confident it would work. He thought about it. No. You presented it as though you were. That's different. Is it? He looked at the empty coffee cup on the corner of the console. The ring mark at the bottom. If I'd walked in there uncertain, they'd have heard it. Not the words, you can control the words. But, the way you hold yourself when you're uncertain is different from the way you hold yourself when you know what you're doing, and, they'd have read the difference and, they'd have pushed on it. He picked up the cup and dropped it in the recycler. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is decide to be confident before you've got a good reason to be. I held that thought in the place where I hold things that don't fit existing categories. That's not rational, I said. No, he said. It's not. He picked up the field pack from under the console, the battered gray one with the sticker on the dent, and put it on his shoulder. Good work today, Sabbath, he said, and walked out of the manifest bay. He sounded like he meant it. Like it was an ordinary thing to say at the end of a shift where nothing in particular had happened. I stayed at my console. I looked at the sensor display, which now showed a clear corridor. I looked at the empty ring mark on the console edge where the coffee cup had been. I looked at my screen, where the survey archive was still open, and the cross-filing notifications were still showing as sent, and everything was documented and filed and procedurally correct. I opened my private log. I wrote, * he decided to be confident before he had a reason to be. He says this is not rational. He says this as though it is a minor technical distinction. I do not think it is minor. I think it is the specific category of thing that I have been trying to classify since he arrived on this station, and I think the reason I have not been able to classify it is that I have been trying to find the correct existing category. I do not think there is an existing category. I think the category is the thing, *. I stared at that for a while. Then, I went to the small supply station in the corner of the manifest bay, and I looked at the coffee substitute, and I looked at the field kit supply compartment that Reeves had left on the counter when he made his cup, and there was still a packet of the actual coffee in there, just one, which meant he had used one and left one, and I was aware that I had looked at it for long enough to constitute a decision. I made it. It tasted nothing like the substitute. It tasted like something that had decided to be exactly what it was and was not interested in being close enough. I drank all of it. I filed the post-incident report. Under outcome, I wrote, * potential military engagement resolved through diplomatic communication. No casualties. Station operational status, nominal * under contributing factors, I wrote, * effective analysis of historical transit pattern data. Timely cross-filing of survey documentation * under personnel notation, I wrote, * Terran liaison officer Reeves demonstrated effective communication strategy. Recommend commendation * I did not write what I was actually thinking. I did not write * he knew before we knew. He prepared before it was time to prepare. He was confident before confidence was justified. And, when it was over, he left like he'd just finished the manifests * I did not write. I do not know what category this belongs to, but I think it belongs to the category of things that have always been true and that I simply was not looking at correctly. I saved the report. I closed the archive. I sat in the manifest bay while the station's night cycle dimmed the panels further, and the Meneth left for their quarters, and the hum settled into its lowest frequency, and the stars through the small viewport were the same as they always were, except that I had the persistent and unclassified sense that something about the way I was looking at them had changed. 3 days after the fleet withdrew, the message arrived from Terran Liaison Headquarters. It came through the standard administrative channel, tag routine, timestamped during the station's sleep cycle, and it would have sat in the queue until morning processing if Dathiel hadn't been in his office at the time, which he was, because Dathiel slept in 3-hour intervals and considers sleeping more than that a personal failing, and flagged it for immediate review. He called me in at the start of first shift. The message was addressed to Senior Coordinator Dathiel, copied to the station commander and the Hegemony Administrative Regional Director, and it was from something called the Terran Liaison Strategic Integration Office, which I had not previously known existed. It was 4 paragraphs long. It used formal language to accomplish several things simultaneously. It acknowledged the diplomatic resolution of the Vethkai incident with what it called commendable efficiency. It noted that the Hegemony Administrative Survey filing backlog had been escalated for immediate rectification, and it informed us that Officer First Class Reeves was being transferred, effective the next available transit, to the Hegemony Joint Coordination Bureau in the Inner Systems. Effective immediately. Next available transit, 4 days. Dathiel was sitting behind his desk with 2 of his arms flat on the surface in the posture he adopts when he is refusing to perform the emotional reaction he is having. I am informing you, he said, as his direct administrative contact. I understand, I said. You will update the personnel transfer documentation. Yes. The Form 7 Delta and Form 9 Epsilon authorizations will need to be formally closed. I'll close them today. Dathiel's upper plates did a very small version of the cascade. He was looking at the message. Not at me, at the message, the specific language of commendable efficiency and immediate rectification, the kind of institutional language that takes credit for things it did not do and distributes it to structures that were not present. The Strategic Integration Office, he said. I haven't heard of it either. He has. I thought about the Form 9 Epsilon. The 40 years of transit logs. The way he had asked, on the first day, where the corridor went, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to know what I knew. Yes, I said. He has. I left Dathiel's office and went to find Reeves. He was in the cargo dock, which was not unusual. He'd taken to spending parts of his shifts down there, ostensibly processing birthing manifests, actually doing the thing I had come to understand he did everywhere, which was learning the physical reality of the place well enough that he could move through it without thinking. The cargo hauler that had been berthed during the incident was gone, but 2 new arrivals had come in the day before, a small Meneth trader with a cargo of processed rim minerals, and a Vethkai commercial vessel, the first Vethkai commercial arrival at Orbit 7 since the incident. This last fact was not accidental. I had checked the vessel's registry against the commercial house affiliations I'd researched during the incident, and the vessel was registered to one of the 3 Vethkai commercial houses that held primary contracts on the Orvith corridor. They were here because the corridor was clear. They were here because the incident had been resolved. Reeves was talking to the Vethkai pilot. I stopped at the dock entrance and watched this for a moment. The pilot was a younger member of the species, recognizable by the less developed secondary musculature, the expression layers not yet fully independent, and was looking at Reeves with an expression that I read as somewhere between cautious and fascinated, which given Vethkai expression architecture meant something more complicated was happening under the surface. They were talking about the mineral cargo. Not about the fleet. Not about the incident. About pricing volatility in the rim commodity markets and whether the current transit backlog was likely to stabilize in the next 10 cycles, and Reeves was asking questions with the specific interest of someone who finds the subject genuinely worth understanding, and the Vethkai pilot was answering with increasing fluency, the caution receding into something that looked like the professional pleasure of being asked intelligent questions. I waited. When the conversation reached a natural pause, I walked over. Savith. Reeves looked at my face and read something in it, because he was Reeves. What happened? You've been transferred. 4 days. The Vethkai pilot excused itself with Vethkai formal grace and retreated toward its vessel. Reeves turned back to the manifest he'd been reviewing. He looked at it without reading it for about 3 seconds. Joint Coordination Bureau? Yes. Inner Systems? Yes. He nodded. Not surprise. Not disappointment. The nod of someone who has received information they had already provisionally accounted for. I didn't know, I said, if this was your objective from the beginning. No, he said. I knew it was a possibility. Orvith 7 is where they send people before a bigger assignment. That's not classified, it's just not in any briefing. You learn it from talking to people. He put the manifest down. The Vethkai thing, I wasn't planning that. I was planning to not be caught flat-footed if something happened. Is there a difference? He looked at me. The slight compression around the eyes. I guess that depends on whether you think preparation and intent are the same thing. Are they? Not always. He picked up the manifest again, then set it down again. Savith. The filing backlog. Being rectified. Escalated to the regional director. That'll fix this corridor for a while. But, the survey expansion project has 14 other active survey areas, and if the administrative unit is under-resourced enough to run a months-long backlog, they're probably under-resourced enough to have this problem in at least half of them. He looked at the dock bay, the mineral trader, the Vethkai commercial vessel. Someone needs to check those filings. That's not a station-level function. No. He picked up the manifest a third time, and this time he read it. But, it's a Joint Coordination Bureau function. He made a note on it. A small correction, a routing error in the mineral trader's documentation. The JCB has authority to audit cross-filing compliance across administrative units. That's what they were set up for in the partition aftermath. Most people don't use it because it's a political fight with the administrative unit directors, and political fights are expensive. He flipped to the next page of the manifest. So you'll do it, I said. I'll try. The corner of his mouth. I'm a cargo manifest officer. I stood in the cargo dock for a moment and looked at him filling out the manifest correction with the same focused attention he brought to everything that was in front of him, and I thought about the thing I had written in my private log, the category that is the thing, and I thought about something else that I had not yet written down, something I had been circling for 3 days and had not yet found the correct words for. I found them, standing there. Not all of them. The useful ones. Dathiel approved your forms, I said. Yes. He reads everything 3 times. He's been on this station for 19 years. He knows every procedure, every protocol, every edge case in the administrative code. He would have seen if anything was formally wrong. I know. Nothing was formally wrong. No. You wrote those forms so that nothing would be formally wrong. Specifically. You knew he would check. Reeves looked up from the manifest. He didn't confirm this. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with the expression I had filed under assessing whether something is worth saying out loud. You were not operating under false pretenses, I said. The forms were correct. The emergency access was used for its stated purpose. The outcome served the station, the corridor, and the hegemony's interests. Everything you did was defensible. Yes. And you arranged it so that it would be defensible before you started. A pause. Yes, he said. That's not logistics, I said. No. He went back to the manifest. It's not. I walked back to my office. I sat at my desk. I looked at the coffee, the actual coffee, the compressed supply packet he'd left in the manifest bay, which I had brought to my office because the ritual had changed and I was not sure I could fully explain why, and which I made now with the particular precision of something that had stopped being a concession and started being a preference. I drank it. I opened my private log, and I wrote for a long time, and then I deleted most of what I wrote because most of it was trying to explain something that I was beginning to suspect could not be fully explained, only described from the outside. What I kept was this: the galaxy was informed of the Orvith 7 incident through the standard summary reports, which noted a diplomatic resolution achieved through effective cross-filing rectification. The summary reports are accurate. The summary reports do not contain the following: that the diplomatic resolution was initiated by a 26-year-old Terran cargo officer who read 40 years of historical transit data on his 5th day at a waystation posting, filed 2 administrative forms on the basis of a pattern that no analytical system had flagged, and spent 6 hours talking a Vethkai fleet officer out of an engagement by asking what the actual problem was. The summary reports do not note that he did all of this in between processing cargo manifests and eating preserved food and drinking coffee from a field kit that had a decorative adhesive on the dent in the side. The Terran Liaison Strategic Integration Office will note, in their transfer documentation, that Officer First Class Reeves demonstrated effective crisis communication skills. This is true. It is also approximately the same accuracy as describing the Orvith skirmish of 40 years ago as a resource access disagreement. He is being transferred to the Joint Coordination Bureau. He will be given access to the Cross-Filing Audit Authority. He will be, within the structure of an organization that categorizes beings by their formal designations, a junior officer in a mid-tier coordination bureau with no particular distinction on his record except a commendation from a minor waystation incident. I do not think the administrative unit directors are going to enjoy the next several cycles. I saved it. I closed the log. I looked out my office window, not a viewport, just the interior window that looked out onto the manifest bay, which was currently occupied by one of the Meneth logistics staff finishing a cargo verification, the bioluminescent panels humming at their usual dim frequency, everything ordinary. In 4 days, the manifest bay would have a different secondary console operator. The manifests would still get processed. The coffee substitute would still taste like what it tasted like. The corridor would keep running its 600 commercial transit registrations per cycle. The survey filings in the 14 other active survey areas, across 14 other stretches of space where the administrative backlog was probably months long and nobody had noticed, would not fix themselves. On the morning of the 4th day, a Vethkai diplomatic vessel arrived in the docking bay. Not commercial. Diplomatic, smaller than the fleet ships, built for precision rather than force, with the Sovereignty Council sigil on the hull and a formal embossment that meant it carried someone with direct council authority. It docked without a prior transit request, which required me to file an emergency berthing authorization, which I did, and then I stood in the dock bay next to Reeves and Dathiel and watched the hatch open. The delegate was called Envoy Rank Velsoreth Keen. Older than Savathorin. The secondary musculature fully independent, fully trained, giving nothing away and not performing the effort of giving nothing away, the real thing, which is the absence of performance. They descended the dock ramp with the specific ease of someone who has moved through important spaces for long enough that the importance doesn't register anymore. They looked at Dathiel. Senior Coordinator. Envoy rank. Dathiel's plates were doing the polite compression. We are honored. Velsoreth Keen looked at Reeves. Their secondary musculature did something small and unreadable. Officer Reeves. Envoy rank. Reeves. Hands in his jacket pockets. The scar through the eyebrow. Not performing ease any more than Velsoreth Keen was, it was just his actual face, in an actual moment, which somehow managed to read as the most relaxed thing in the dock bay. The Sovereignty Council reviewed the marker documentation, Velsoreth Keen said. The survey team's scope does not infringe on sovereignty provisional claims. The markers will remain pending commercial development coordination. Good, Reeves said. The Council has also directed me to note, through informal communication, that the manner in which this matter was raised, directly, practically, with specific attention to the underlying concern rather than the presenting grievance, was noted. A pause. Noted, Reeves said. It sounded like he was filing it. Velsoreth Keen's secondary musculature did the unreadable thing again. The sovereignty has commercial interests in the Orvith corridor. Those interests are well served by stable transit conditions. Stable transit conditions are well served by administrative competence. Agreed. Administrative competence is, in the sovereignty's experience, rare. Reeves looked at the envoy. The slight compression around the eyes. We're working on it, he said, with a tone that could have been official modesty or personal acknowledgement or an 18-month advance notice of what he intended to do with a cross-filing audit, and which was probably all three. Velsorathkeen looked at him for 2 seconds in the way that the Vethkai look at things they are deciding the category of. Then, they turned back to Dathiel. I will require a formal reception chamber for the documentation signing. Of course, Dathiel said. Savath. I'll prepare it, I said. The formal proceedings took 2 hours. There was documentation. There was tea. The Vethkai traveling delegation had brought their own, a dark amber preparation that smelled like something extracted from stone, which they offered to Dathiel and to me, and which Dathiel declined with polished courtesy, and I accepted with what I hoped was polished courtesy, and which tasted like what I imagined stone would taste like if stone had strong feelings about its own stoneness. Reeves did not attend the formal proceedings. He was in the cargo dock, finishing the manifests for the day's arrivals. I checked, after. He had also, quietly and, without mentioning it, updated the berthing request protocol documentation to add a flag for vessels arriving without prior transit registration, so that future emergency authorizations would route to the correct officer automatically instead of requiring manual identification. It was a small correction. It would save approximately 20 minutes per incident for whoever was on the floor next time. He had not filed a form for it. He had not noted it in any log. It was just done, tucked into the administrative architecture of the station in the way that things are tucked in when someone knows the system well enough to place a fix where it will stay. I noted it in my private log. I filed it under the category I have been building since day one, the one that has no good name and keeps growing. The transit shuttle left at 3rd hour. Reeves had 2 bags. The same 2 bags he'd arrived with, the worn gray field pack, the dented personal case with the yellow alarmed creature on it, the one he'd told me was named Pikachu and had not elaborated on. He was at the dock bay 20 minutes early, which I had since learned was not punctuality but preparation. 20 minutes to assess the shuttle's condition, the crew, the berthing configuration, the dock bay in the context of whatever the next assignment would require him to know. Dathiel was there. This was not required. Dathiel's schedule showed no obligation for this time period. I had checked, not because I doubted it, but because noting it seemed important. He was standing at the dock bay entrance in his full coordinator's dress, all 4 arms positioned in the formal Vorath arrangement for a significant departure, the one reserved for officers of meaningful rank. Reeves wasn't an officer of meaningful rank. He was a junior liaison on transfer to a mid-tier bureau. Dathiel had the formal arrangement anyway. Reeves noticed. He glanced at it, and then, away, the way he glanced away from things that registered before he decided how to respond to them. You don't have to do the whole thing, he said. I am aware of that, Dathiel said. He kept the arrangement. I was there as well, which also wasn't required. I had the coffee, actual coffee, the last of the compressed supply packets, made in my office and carried down, which was a logistically unnecessary action for which I had no formal justification. I handed it to him. He took it. He looked at it. The coffee, in the dock bay, with the shuttle running its pre-departure cycle behind us. Thanks, Savath, he said. If the administrative backlog is as widespread as you think it is, I said, you're going to need resources at the JCB. The formal audit process is slow. The informal relationship building is faster but requires leverage. I know. The 3 Vethkai commercial houses with contracts on the Orvith corridor, I said. Velsorathkeen's visit means the Sovereignty Council has logged a positive record of this incident in their diplomatic archive. That's leverage. Not formal, informal. The kind that doesn't appear in any document but exists in the pattern of who responds to what request. He looked at me. The compression around the eyes, and something else, a slight additional quality that I had not catalogued before and was filing now, under new entry. Have you been reading the diplomatic relationship management protocols? He asked. I've been here 11 years, I said. I read everything. He took a sip of the coffee. The dock bay's ambient light was the cool functional blue of pre-departure, not particularly cinematic, not a good light for faces. His looked the same as always. Practical. Lived in. The scar through the eyebrow from a cargo crate at age 14. Sabbath, he said. Request a lateral reassignment. I'm sorry? To the JCB. Lateral reassignment. You're a hegemony civil staff officer, you can request inter-bureau placement, it doesn't require promotion review, it just requires a Form 14 Gamma and a receiving bureau confirmation. He looked at the coffee again. I can send the confirmation before my shuttle docks at the Inner Systems Hub. You'd have the paperwork closed before the end of the cycle. The dock bay hum. The pre-departure cycle. I'm a logistics officer, I said. Yeah. He handed me back the empty cup. So am I. He picked up his bags. He shook Dathiel's hand, the Terran grip, firm and brief, which the Vorith find physically strange but which Dathiel received without the usual micro-recoil I had seen in Vorith meeting human physical contact for the first time, which meant this was not the first time, and he walked into the shuttle. The dock bay doors closed. Dathiel held the formal arm arrangement for a moment after the doors were sealed, and then released it, slowly, in the order that the protocol specifies, but that most Vorith rush because the protocol is long. He did the full version. He had never, in 11 years, done the full version for anyone leaving this station. I stood there holding the empty coffee cup. I thought about the Form 14 Gamma. I thought about the cross-filing audit authority. I thought about 14 survey areas, and the administrative backlog, and the corridors that connected things that should be connected and weren't because the paperwork was late and nobody was checking. I thought about a 26-year-old Terran sitting in a transit shuttle right now, probably reading something, probably already thinking about the next corridor, the next 40 years of logs, the next pattern that nobody had noticed yet. I thought about what he'd said in the dock bay 3 days ago. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is decide to be confident before you've got a good reason to be. I went back to my office. I opened the Form 14 Gamma. It was, technically, outside my current operational parameters. It was not what I had planned. It was not rational in the sense that it had no guaranteed outcome, no clear success metric, no precedent in my 11 years of service at this station. I filled it out anyway. I sent it. Then, I went to my desk and sat down and opened my private log and looked at the category I had been building since day one, the one with no good name, and I thought about what the right name for it was for a long time. I didn't find the right name. I'm not sure there is one. Not in any language I know. But I have a working description, which I added to the log that morning and which I have not changed since. The thing humans do that has no category in our systems is not a single thing. It is a posture. It is the posture of a being that looks at a problem and does not first ask whether the problem is solvable, but asks what would need to be true for it to be solvable, and then starts making those things true, one administrative form at a time, one transit log at a time, one cold cup of coffee at a time, without ever appearing to notice that this is not what most beings do. The galaxy laughed at the young Terran. I was there. I heard it. The laughter stopped the day the 17 warships withdrew. But I do not think that is when the laughing actually became wrong. I think it was wrong from the first morning, when he set his bags down in an assignment nobody wanted, looked at a wall, and asked where the corridor went. Not because he was impressive, because he was already working.